Hello and good evening to another TACK talk. Today we're going to have a lecture by Jan de Vylder and Inge Vinck, architects from Ghent, and two people with whom I have also had the pleasure to collaborate on various occasions. Jan de Vylder and Inge Vinck are co-founders of AJDVIV, or Architects Jan de Vylder and Inge Vinck in Ghent, a practice that describes itself, or has been described, as multidisciplinary, in the sense that it probably has explored virtually every corner of architecture, and especially corners as well. Only recently, yesterday, I showed a house which I had the pleasure to see in Ghent, and when you go up the last corner, go up the roof, there suddenly is a small terrace with a mirror where you don't expect it. So the corners are explored and important. Jan de Vylder and Inge Vinck have been present in various ways in architectural culture, and I think they have also shown what it means to establish a community of culture and a community of architecture. In fact, consistently at the ETA with their initiative for the Carousel, traveling exhibition, an exhibition that doesn't only travel in space, but also between references. Their work has been very extensively published and also awarded prizes, including the Leone d'Argento or Silver Lion at the Biennale di Venezia in 2018, the Henry van der Velde Award in 2018. They've been shortlisted and were finalists in the Mies van der Rohe Award in 2019. They won the Schelling Architecture Prize in Germany in 2016, and many others. At the Biennale, they have been present, among others, with the most recently with their exhibition or their installation Unless Ever People in 2018. And we collaborated on the Belgian Pavilion with the installation Bravura, Scarcity, Beauty, where Jan and Inge were part of the Bravura curatorial team. So that's the practice. Individually, there are Jan de Vylder, who has been working also with Stefan Behl and Frank de Mulle in Belgium, and has been a partner in various formations, most recently together with Inge Vinck. Jan has been a professor of architecture and design at the ETH Zurich since 2017. Previously, he was professor at Mendrisio, TU Delft, the Sandberg Institute in Amsterdam, and La Cambre Horta, and St. Lucas in Ghent and Brussels. Inge has been also collaborator at Stefan Behl and Patrice Moutigny in Paris, and also teaching at Mendrisio, TU Delft, and Sandberg Institute, ENSAP in Lille, and various other Belgian universities. So much for my much briefer introduction, I guess, than Jan had feared I would give, to give you the floor.
So, Christoph, thank you. How do I do this? Share screen. This is like this. We have been exercising this. Then you go to this screen, and then I have to swipe this up, and here we are. So, Christoph, everyone, thank you for the nice introduction. Inge and I, we are here together in front of camera and screen. As this is a talk about 1 hour, we try to keep schedule And we decided that merely I will give the lecture first, and then later on we have some extra images to bring back when questions will be raised, and we are hopeful we can answer those questions somehow. The title of the lecture is that it does not look good makes that it looks good. And on one hand, it points to a project we have realized in the frame of architecting the Vylder Vinck like now 2-3 years ago for the Horst Festival. I will present this at the end. But on the other hand, I think this is the title which at this moment is a kind of vibe which interests us very much in what we do. And I will explain it by one and another. Okay. First little project I like to present is a project that I situated 1993. I should check it up myself, exactly the date. And it's a project that I made together with Patrick Moyersoen at that time. And what happened is that we were just off school and we got a job for the refurbishment of a villa in the suburbs of Brussels in Leeuw Saint-Pierre. And it was a young man, our age, maybe he was a little older, but that doesn't matter. And he inherited a white villa in a 2-tall garden. And this is the image we made on that time, still analog on checkered paper with techniques of raster and everything. And we were a little bit surprised. The young man was alone and the villa was not that small, we thought. And he was complaining that it was too small and he wanted to enhance it as he projected almost the double size of the actual villa. And this struck us. I mean, and this is the first image. And the second image is the proposal we brought to him. When we were there, we felt that it was not too small as such, but maybe the space felt very small, since the ceiling floor height was not sufficient enough. And those are 4 drawings that go along with it. And the key drawing is this one, in which we explained to him that our opinion was that we better should take away the floor between basement and first floor and ground floor, and then subsequently also the floor between first level and attic level. But by doing that, one would gain space. Space not in square meters, but space and feeling. And as we said, the garden was tall enough, we could dig out a house and that's it. And when we pinned up these drawings on the wall of the living room, I still remember me, and we were explaining, the smile from the new client changed to a big laughter. And like, let's say, half an hour later, we were back out of the room in the front door. We lost the job as young architects coming from school. You can imagine double sizing this house. That's quite a lot of money for young architects. It would have been quite a job. But on the other hand, we lost it immediately, one of our first jobs. But I think we won so much other in our mind, like, well, we're happy to lose it this way. Then, this is a work of Ante Timmermans, an artist we know very well. I will not situate, but I bring this image in between because it's little small work. It's not one of his main works, but it's in fact an image, an aerial view on a school which has been refurbished by the practice of Bart de Hane, another exemplary practice, I have to say, we like to refer to. And what it's about, you see there are kind of set of small pavilion schools from the 50s, post-war development of schools in Belgium, and then they are now replaced in this huge investment of the Flemish government towards new schools. They are broken down, replaced by Bart de Hane, by really a nice school. But Ante Timmermans was involved in this project as the artist in residence, one could say, for the project. And what he proposed was keeping one of the old pavilions, not filling it with functional program, but just leaving it as a free space towards the future new school, which is actually today yet open, and in which they could discover just the joy of space. But this is maybe a side thing, but it's very interesting to announce. The point is that Ante Timmermans wrote down here the Flemish or the Dutch words op het spel zetten, or the French words mettre en jeu. And I think this goes along with the first presentation of the first project. Sometimes you have to dare things to do things. This is a house called Rothe Embark, where we also spent with Christophe a remarkable night somewhere in August a couple of years ago in the back garden. But this is maybe to introduce you in Flanders a little bit. This is the start of the Flemish Ardennes. And for those who are lovers of cycling around, this is where they say the Ronde van Vlaanderen really starts at the start of the Koppenberg. But see the Flemish field here, nicely depicted by Philippe Dujardin. All images you will see, maybe some few not, but are of his hand. And in the middle, you see the house where we like to talk about. It's a house for a young couple, Piet and Alan, who inherited from the family, let's say a little bit too early in their life. So they had not enough resources to really refurbish the house or the whole plot as such. And this is what they inherited, a very beautiful volume. And this is what we presented them. We presented them a model in which we started to talk with them and saying, listen, this 75,000 euros at that time, it's far too less unless we could make this budget productive in material and the building could be built by yourself. And announcing or presenting this project happened with drawings, of course, but also with a model like this, which is kind of like puppet house size model that gives them an impression on how the house not only would look, but also how you could build a house. Another image gives this impression again. And at the end, what did we do? We built inside the house a glazed house. And this glazed house, depending on mood or season, can change from attitude. But at the end, one is always still in the old house as it has been found. And now I could talk with you about many nowadays topics about sustainable space and climatized zones and everything, which is very interesting and very necessary to think about, but on the other hand, risks to become tendency and fashion. But anyway, what is for us more important is the way how we can reuse the things we found, not only in a way of restoration or renovation, but maybe also in a way that, for example, you can imagine that this house also later on, as it is a total demountable house, can become another house or another project once again. So for us, looking to this project, or let's say working on that project at that time, it was a discovery, or not only a discovery, a challenge towards budget, a challenge towards context, a challenge towards clients, how they could live in a different way than they lived before. But maybe at the end also, when you look to this image, you see in the middle still a wood stove, as they wanted to have the pleasure of the wood stove. And to me, much more interesting is to meander and talk about the position of the stove, the middle, of course, on one hand, but on the other hand, just the position towards the old fireplace into the wall. And also, for example, things like you see there a concrete beam in the old walls, which is needed, of course, when you take away the old floors. Exactly, the beam is at the height of the old floors. One has to take it all together by a kind of concrete beam around, done like that. But a very important small detail for us that we casted this beam, the formwork of this beam has been done with the old planks of the old floor. To us, this is whatever other strategy or need or urge in architecture we are facing today, and we really have to face. On the other hand, finding or including still the small moments of the detail of architecture, of the space of architecture, is still more important than any other thought and strategy. And this gives this atmosphere in the house. We are now walking back towards the kitchen. The kitchen today has been refurbished differently, but still. And then towards the bathroom. And at the end, they found themselves a small house that is on their size, on their capacity, in their hands. And that's maybe where it could be about when we think about the house today, how to live things, not how to make a kitchen, but how to cook, not how to make a bathroom, but how to bath, and so on. To end up with this small project is a painting, drawing regarding this facade. This facade is the only facade of the house that needed to be insulated. Yes, you've seen that it's a glazed house in the house, which helped us that we didn't have to really renovate all facades or update them with insulation, though one part was leaning to the outside wall. It's this wall, and the beauty of the wall was that it was a wall out of old bricks on which rain and time, of course, changed the aspect of the wall. The decay came on the other hand, but a kind of beauty also. And if you have to insulate it, it disappears. And with the client, Peter and Ellen, we were concerned about that. And this image here, this drawing depicts the idea of the beauty of the wall. And then we had to cover it. And we covered it with typically cement tiles one always find on old waiting walls. And on those cement tiles, we did exercises on the idea of how could we represent that beautiness of that old brick wall behind. And here you see a set of exemplary exercises we made in how we could treat those tiles. Finally, it ended up to be a simple exercise of just a drawing of lines on which Peter and Ellen, like for 2 or 3 weekends, they were constantly drawing those lines on the tiles before they were hung up on the wall. And it's quite an exercise because tolerances were quite a topic. And why do you do that? Well, maybe just the ambition of wanting to hide a certain beauty at a certain point. You see here how you approach the house today. A nice image of Philippe Dujardin again. Look how he brings together the left facade of the last house with the house as such. And then when you come close by, you might see it. And probably you might not see it also, but those who might see it might be a little bit hanging around and wondering what happened. And truly, sometimes some people have been ringing the red door to ask what was happening on that wall. And as you can see, this house, as I said, at the end on the outside, we did not really restore it. It stayed a little bit as it was found. Yes, the door has been nicely painted in red. But then, of course, there are small details that let you discover that something, I would not say is wrong, but is different regarding its past. For example, now under the attic, there are bedrooms. That's, of course, what we all do today. Before this attic room was just free space. This needed kind of light, it needed daylight, and then we brought the dormer over there. But the window of the dormer is in fact a copy of the trompe-l'œil window, which is at the first level visible. On the other hand, the dormer has been mirrored out on both sides, by which also the perspective of the roof moves on. So what happened and started once in the trompe-l'œil found a kind of continuation in another trompe-l'œil. And this is another element I'd like to add at this point. I found it on a wall at the CCA in Montreal, and it's of Gordon Matta Clark. Architects, of course, love to refer to Gordon Matta Clark, but maybe we rather love to refer to this saying, here is what we have to offer you. Confusion guided by a clear sense of purpose. It brings us to another project where also Christophe was referring to, that we have been presenting at the Venice Biennale 2018, yes, 2018. And it's a project for the Psychiatric Clinic Caritas in Mala, near to Ghent. And what you see here is an image, a kind of collage, a painting image of the competition entry. And on the image, you see like 3 white loggias, keep on remembering those, but at the end, the real competition was about the central building you see here at the image. And maybe to quickly go a little bit, I keep an eye on time, to go a little bit aside of the story is this beautiful image of the original status of the Hoorn Psychiatric Clinic around 1908. It was at that time exemplary and revolutionary. Before, psychiatric patients were kept into the city of Ghent in quite, let's say, locked situation to protect them against himself and against society against. But this was a new model of a park in which different pavilions had been raised for the different, let's say, forms of diseases. And what happens, of course, is that then after a certain time, this is an aerial view, when it after a certain time, after post-war, one could say, luckily, in 1910, there was a new vision on psychiatry, or at least more attention to it, and built clinics for it. But then after post-war, in the 50s, they started to really change the plot, and they started to demolish quite a lot of the villas here on the left side. On the left below side, all the 3 villas has been demolished. And this is a model from the competition in which we brought it all together, and in which you can see how many villas that has been demolished at that time already. And for example, also this one here, there one is one missing. And I don't know if I can get that away. And the point was, to us, the competition brief was purely about the pavilion in the middle that I showed earlier. But when we were there, we understood that probably more was needed. And we always tell it, and we always say that what we entered into the competition were 3 answers, though there was only 1 question. So we answered 2 other questions that had not been raised. And the first question we added to the competition brief was a question of the idea of a certain unity of architecture all over the place. And we cataloged, we walked around into the place, and what we discovered was that although the differences of the different periods of realizing the project, with a certain view of eye, one could say that maybe a certain unity could be refound. And the unity for us was the idea of reintroducing loggias, that you could give, of course, some of the old buildings had already loggias, but also the new, or the, let's say, demolish or changed buildings by that time, we could give new reinterpretations and introduce loggias. And by that, those loggias could become a kind of new frame of unity all over the place. So this model was added with those kind of elements, and we announced it as one of the extra concerns we wanted to share in this competition. And this goes now again together with the image as you see it right now. Second point of the answer, or let's say an answer that on a question that had not been raised, is that we made we said, listen, if you want to work with us, we want to make a project of process. That means that we do not talk just about the delivery of a project, but we do talk about a project which is on the move. Because actually the question was, this building of this old pavilion building of Caritas, which was the object of the competition, was an abandoned building in which they had started already to demolish parts of the building until the moment they found asbestos, and they had to wait for it. And the young director who came at that time, he was faced with this demolishing, and he said, yes, of course, regarding nowadays regulations, we can't move on with that anymore. But we are facing with a loss of heritage on one hand, but on the other hand also, you could say that in a certain moment, architecture and space is really a topic of mental diseases, of many mental diseases. And the question was not only on the competition of how can we still work with the old building, but maybe also how it eventually could be another space of place in which all kind of activities could happen, which are normally not expected in the regular frame of functions, of program, of therapy and such. And that's why we made a puppet house, and we made a kind of sets of drawings of which we said, you know, we're gonna present now a project, but possibly through the time, not only because the building will, of course, be confronted with a certain building decay, throughout of time also your idea of use might change. And this is the instrument, the model and the drawings we will keep on using with you in the further project as it might move on years after the first delivery, actually, as it happens today. Now I go to the real answer, or let's say the real question that has been raised. That's it. This is an image of the Pavilion long time ago, and you see in this image the old loggia in front. And this is the way we found it. As I told you, at the moment of the competition, the building was already partly stripped, as they say, demolished. Rain was inside, so the floors were heavily suffering from water. And you see that there was added a new loggia, I think back in the 50s, maybe 60s. Another image of the status. And then you see how the building looks today. And it pretty still looks like this today. And what you see here is that the roof tiles are still not there. And this is not, once again, because of our proposal, but this was because as found. But then if you look to the below side, we opened the windows of the loggias. We took away the upstands. We also opened the upstands under the window. So it became a total open building in which just one can walk through. And here you see what happened. We took away the floor. Rain comes inside, it can drain away. We took away plasterboard so that the building can breathe when it gets wet. And then we added a few kind of glazed houses in it, so that at a certain moment, without climatizing them, still in the in-between seasons, one can use the building in one and another way. For us as architecture practice at that time still architect in the Vylder Vinck, we were confronted here in the project with many opposite ways of thinking than we have been confronted before. The budget was low once again, but for example, also we needed to design something of space for which, in fact, there was not given any program, any functional reason. We had to think about space to make space available for any other use in psychiatry. Not only, but for example, also as the building was demolished and also when we stripped it, more and more severe building problems came ahead. We had to restore, or we have to support some things. And for example, here, this is a way how we restored the entrance of a building. And this restoration did not happen by the typical architectural detailing, but by just giving to the contractors a way of how they could all stitch it together, in this case by a simple concrete block, an economy of means, as they say today. And this is one of the glazed houses in it. We walk around now and you see floors are open, rain comes in, when it's wet, it wets, when it's snow, unfortunately it doesn't snow anymore, but we experienced it when snow comes down. The lamppost is not one we designed, we just stole it from the park. And then we walk further on into the building and we come closer to others, greenhouses going around. And we also now turn into the second part of the building where an auditorium had been made. And this auditorium is just the result of taking away a floor between the below part, the basement. The floor was not anymore in a good shape. And that led to a kind of auditorium of which I would say that it just delivers pleasure of space. And yes, by the evening around the fireplace, youngsters come around and they smoke their cigarette over there. And people have many different meanings or feelings with the space. Some patients still don't enter the building or don't walk through the building. But therapist says to us that's even a good sign, because at the end they find themselves in a position towards space. Others say that only passing 5 minutes or 10 minutes there is good enough. And we met a couple of people later on who emphasized or who explained to us that being though patient for many months at the site, being able to return to this free space was for them meaningful at all. You see, this is way of restitch, or the same with the way of the windowsill where we repaired the windowsill with some concrete, and thanks to a white cloudy day on a blue sky, we decided to paint all the concrete elements into a kind of white cloud. As I said, this project to us delivered many ways of rethinking the things we were used to do. I think we at the end already for a long time were interested in, I would not say the vernacular, but the context rather than the vernacular, the context of moment and place. At this point, we really needed to shift all thinking. And this has been picked up at many times. And yes, we were invited in the exhibition Free Space, curated by Grafton architects Yvonne and Shelley. And they asked us to present this project in the Free Space. And Unless Ever People was the title of it, because that's maybe for us, finally, when we make architecture, where it's about, unless it's always for people. And when presenting this at the Venice Biennale, I skipped the images of the presentation. We also made a kind of booklet with the same name. And in that booklet, we not only collected on the right side the 97 images of Philippe Dujardin regarding the project, but on the left side, we invited many people to make some thoughts, writings, reflections onto the project. And amongst the director, amongst therapists, amongst people that live there, students, and they give all their idea on it and they give all their comment on it. So the booklet is a critical booklet. It's not a booklet just celebrating architecture. It's a booklet reflecting on what happened here and which are, I would not say the pros and the contrast, but which are the eventual next things to be expected. So for us, this is when one could call our architectural practice capable to enter the world of research. Maybe I'm not so always happy with the word of research, but at the end, we entered the word of a kind of reflection. And those are sketches of recent thoughts and ideas of addition and change that might come over the building. Drawings made by Inge. And well, we are on to next, but it goes slow. I can confirm that. This brings us to a phrase which we would have loved written ourselves, but happily it has been written by Francis Alice, Belgian artist living in Mexico City, raised architect at the architectural school of Tournai. And what he writes here really, I believe, is something which frames for us quite what we are looking for. Again, we have to stay decent towards the person of Francis Alice and the work he makes. And it says sometimes doing something poetic can become political. Sometimes doing something political can become poetic. It's unbelievable how nice this sentence brings two words together, poetic and political, of two words of which one can say that they are hardly combinable in the same sentence. But yes, I believe that what we are looking for, we dare to say that it deals in some or other way with those two sentences. And I bring it to a project we are in full building site phase today. It's a competition we won a couple of years ago at the city of Charleroi. This is an exposition building in the middle of the city. Well, we are now at the height of the Belfort Tower of the townhouse, and we're looking over the old industrial landscape of Charleroi with the terrace. In the middle, you have a 66 square meters tall exhibition space, which was raised in the 50s to expose the power of the heavy metal industry in Charleroi. And this is quite gigantic. What you look at is like from this side, you see almost only one level with an average height of level of 9 meters and an average capacity of floor capacity of 3 ton square meter. Yes, they presented full train locomotives into the building to show off the power. But this is an image from the building site periods. And what you see here is that you see that the two halls on the left and the right side, each 3 levels high, are like about to be finished. And in the middle part, 12,000 square meter tall, being the kind of lobby space, this is still in full building modus. And this image triggered us gigantically, because what was the point of the competition? End of the 60s, the whole European industry of heavy industry of metal and mining collapsed, and all of a sudden Charleroi turned into from a region of economical power into a region of poverty. And a couple of years ago, Charleroi is one of the zones in Europe which is kept under attention as to be redeveloped. There was some European money like 35 million euros. And the city of Charleroi decided to invest it into the building to renovate it, to recover it. But I can tell you, you need for such a total recovery like 3 to 4 times that amount of money. Anyway, the city of Charleroi, the mayor and the Bouwmeester over there, they were yet keen enough to say, well, we only invest that money into the middle part, and we ask to the architects to present a building of a nowadays architecture in combination with a nowadays passive zero energy thinking. To us, this was quite opposite to say, what happens if you bring all the money to the center part and you do not do anything to the left and the right side? And this image became, in fact, the guideline for the proposal. Here you see some images of these spaces, quite exciting sizes. The colors are not original, so no mistake on that. They have no mean, though they are lovely, of course. They came at a certain time. And this is an image as we found it before we started the building site of the central lobby space, of which you can see already the heights, the staircases, and the beautiful glazed roofs above. So, as I said, the image of the building site became the guideline for our proposal. And what we propose to do, let's say a little bit the opposite. Instead of investing the money in the center part, we only spend the money to open the center part and to make it a kind like of new open terraced park garden that could reconnect somehow the above city and the below city, because here on the model you can see that the building has 3 levels. From the other side you see it. And by that we could save quite some money that we could reinvest in the 2 buildings or merely in the left building to really do just the technical updates, electricity, to make roofs asbestos free and so on. So the proposal to us was not only a proposal of the idea of the architectural space and the idea of reviving cities with parks and such on. At the end, that will be the project. But the project was also about, let's say, the political strategy of redistributing money, means of things all over the building, and by that trying to obtain a total other kind of architecture, not only, but another view on how to manage resources. And today we are in full building sites. This is still some images of the model, in which you can see also, for example, that today we only have the 2 above floors, but there's a 3rd floor lower, which has even a higher floor ceiling. And we will extend with some staircases going down and an escalator and elevator, so that the 3 levels really come free. This is an image of the below level, as just mentioned. And this is a Philippe Dujardin image, but not the Philippe Dujardin collage. He got very, very nervous when he walks around there, because there he sees in real what he sees in his dreams. So there's beautiful images, but today we are yet in the stage of opening the building. And those are images like 2 or 3 weeks ago now, in which you can see that the facades has been taken away, and you can feel the first qualities of the transparency that will connect upper and lower city. Here you see still the middle patio with the facades around. They will disappear soon, but these are some images on what is going on right there. It's regarding this project, and in between this project and the Caritas project, that we were so, let's say, ambitious to bring in the words of Francis Alice. Some images I wished you to take you all over there to understand scale. And then maybe to fill the last 10 minutes, this is an image Inge took one afternoon, I believe, many years ago, of a fence not so far away from here. and the fence is broken. I just recently passed by and I took an image again, sent it to Inge when I was walking in the evening at COVID-19 silent evenings in the city. And what happens here is that someone has restored it with silver paper, and we don't know who. Was it a child, or was it, it's an art school over there, a kind of young artist's idea of recovering things. Anyway, we collect a lot of those images and we make our own story out of it. This is, for example, also an image of the baluster of the Mies van der Rohe Tugendhat house in Brno. And Inge and I visited, I think, 1 week before it was closed, before restoration, and we made a kind of private inventory, private documentation of all, let's say, the traces that were in the building at that time. And you see here this beautiful chromatized railing, and then it was damaged throughout its history, and someone repaired it with a silver duct tape. And we were fascinated by the beauty of those two different, let's say it again, economy of means, how it come together and how it works. And as our practice is happily not only talking about buildings and so on, also about drawings we can talk later about, but we are also making objects. And for example, this is an object, this is called the silver table, which is in fact a black metal circle, which is polished with diamonds, which is not specially, because when you chromatize it, you do it always, and then you lock it with the chrome, but we don't lock it. And the one above in the image is just free in the air, and the one below has been free out of the air for a longer time. But what we love about it is that it, by being open to the air, and if you don't clean it, it starts to get rusty again, to oxidate again, and a kind of other beauty comes into place. And many people bought it, happily we are, and then they had a party on it and they forgot to clean it, and the next day the party is forever in this beautiful small table. Sometimes it really can get tough, but even when it gets tough, it regenerates another beauty. And happy to say, we were scared that possibly, as it always goes in architectural renovations, we were scared that all traces would have been flushed away. But I have to say, those people who made the restoration really took care of the history of the building, of which we all know, of course, that the building not only is for us architecture freaks important in the history of the understanding of Mies van der Rohe, but I think even in more in European history, this building has been quite key in understanding parts of European history. And you see here in the beautiful booklet on the renovation and restoration that the damaged quality has been respected. So again, we make objects, for example, with the duct tape, the silver duct tape, we make now kind of a lot of precious objects like this totally taped, simple building pole that no one really looks attention at. By doing it becomes something like you want to have it in your living room, and then we can come and with a couple of them, we can change the spatial understanding of use of your living room. And depending on the money you will spend, you can have it with a gold lock or a silver blade lock or just a silver tape lock. And it brings us to the last projects we present. And you know, the projects we showed you, often we say when we talk about it, it's like in a walk. When you walk through the forest and you have the good shoes on, still some little stones you can find in your shoes. And then they start to hurt a little bit your walk, but you don't want to open your shoes immediately. They guide you along the walk. And at the end you open them, and that's the story of life somehow. And this is also a project regarding a pavilion we were asked to build. And this is a kind of one-to-one mock-up of what we were looking for. You know, a pavilion is, of course, you could say, one of the most, or one of the sublime themes or typologies in architecture. Architects like to be able to do ones at life. And this came at a moment also that we had that many questions with Caritas and with Charleroi. And then comes a pavilion, and pavilions normally represent the newest society, the newest technique, a kind of optimism. And it was like we were not sure whether that would be a good theme or whether that was still which is in our interest. And we started to, let's say, a small experiment. So we made a form work for a floor plate with the old planks we found around from the old barn, which was at that point. And then we just stacked stones, and in the stones we poured concrete, and the concrete came out. And then on top there was a kind of too thin concrete plate which started to bend so that water could flow easily by itself. And you can guess this pavilion had only lovers and haters and no people in between. And the nature of people, they loved it that insects and small animals could find their place in it, while those who wanted to visit the park on a Sunday afternoon found it something that needed to be demolished as fast as possible. But for us, it had many other meanings. What are we looking at now? Is it beauty, or is it the contrary of beauty? Is it building, or is it not building anymore at all? And to us, finally, this pavilion became maybe a very personal reflection on what a pavilion could be, but also a reflection on where we were at that time with the way we looked or we worked in architecture so far. Things happened as they happened, and yes, the pavilions had been demolished because, in fact, the commissioner, which was the Agency of Forests and Waters in Flanders, gave themselves a building permit on this, but there was a mistake in the building permit. So the commissioner giving themselves a building permit needed to correct the fault that had been done to give the good example as a government. So they demolished it after this. Some people, as I said, were loving it, some were hating it. On one hand, Lieve de Kouter mentioned that maybe it had something to do with Mies van der Rohe, but on the other hand, he expressed to us that he hated it at all. Anyway, it has been demolished, but the festival in which it was part of, and that returned every year to the park, the festival, Horst Music and Art Festival, the curators didn't agree on the fact that it disappeared. The concrete plate was still there, and the year after they asked us to do a reenactment. And maybe the reenactment was even more interesting, or at the end you could say, when you look to this image, remember the first project we showed of Piet and Alan in Rothe Embark, and look what happens here. Let's say this makes of this small lecture the circle somehow around. So this is it. I have to swipe this out, isn't it? Maybe, can I add one more? I was forgotten that it was in a lecture. No, well, I do. San Gotardo, one August day above, when you drive over it, this is just a touristic image. The same place 1 year earlier. We use those two images quite often to reflect on the idea what architecture could be. And maybe architecture could be this gray, humid reflection, background, rain, in which things that you don't see at another moment, all of a sudden you see together. Things that have nothing to do with each other, all of a sudden have something to do with each other. The pile, the traffic sign, the chapel, the staircase, the horse statue. Architecture, if it could make that possible, that they got meanings that you could not understand before, we would say, why not? Thank you. So, you're muted, Christoph. You're muted, Christoph.
Yeah, now I'm not. No, I mean, that is, of course, this is my self-restraint, you know. I'm very good at self-restraint these days. You don't know me like that, do you?
No, that does.
No, I mean, I was reminded of some saying that I think Vivina de Meester, who's one of our members of the board of the advisory board to this network, said at our last meeting, and she was quoting, I think, someone else, but I'm not totally sure. She said, architecture needs to exceed our expectations. You also said something like that. There was, we resolved a problem that nobody, well, that wasn't there, or you know, the whole idea of the problem goes away if you just do architecture to some degree. You do something that resolves perhaps something, but it may not be a problem. It may be something else. It may be yeah, putting together the politic and the poetic. This is, I think, a very, very interesting talk. I haven't formulated a question for that, but the good thing is I don't need to formulate a question because we've got two people who are very keen and actually have formulated questions, whom I would very much like to introduce. And yeah, differently from the other talks, we've got two people because normally we have one person asking questions. That is not because either of them couldn't have done it separately, but simply because they both have actually been very interested in your work, and in one case even been in your studio. So we have Jonas Sklavounos from Athens, or at least born in Athens, graduated in architecture at the University of Patras, and then did a postgraduate study, and I now have to see that I can actually pronounce it properly, in the epistemology of architecture at the National University of Athens. Thank you, Tom. Where he also worked as teaching assistant in the courses of architectural design and analysis and the study of historical settlements and ensembles. He's a co-founder of the research collaborative Buluki, itinerant workshops for the traditional building techniques, which as of 2018 is registered as an urban non-profit company based in Athens. And his research evolves around questions regarding the embodied and intangible aspects of architectural work, as well as the active and participatory approaches of cultural heritage through processes of making, repairing, and building. You gather, I get these bios from you guys. Hamish is an Australian architect and writer, Hamish Lonergan, who's also going to ask questions. He studied architecture at the University of Queensland, where his thesis, supervised by John MacArthur, used David Hume's aesthetics to understand how key critics shaped attitudes to brutalism on social media. Part of this research appears in the Reflections journals as Fuck Yeah Hume in 2018, and in the forthcoming book of selected papers from the Values of Architecture and the Economy of Culture conference in 2019. Since 2017, he has developed his interest in architectural authority and the internet through the exhibition Bathroom Gossip 2019, exploring one-to-one models of Mies van der Rohe's work, and an essay in Footprint on the proposed Notre Dame reconstruction competition. From 2018 to 2020, he worked at Cox Architecture on projects including major indigenous cultural facilities on Minjeribba, Starburg Island. I hope I pronounced this correctly. We agreed earlier that Jonas was going to start with the questions, and then we give the floor to Hamish, if you still agree. Jonas, can I ask you?
Yes, thank you, Christoph, and thank you, Jan and Inge, for this very interesting and very inspiring presentation, may I say. I guess I could begin by saying that your work seems to focus significantly on some key binaries of architectural thought, such as interior and exterior, or intimacy and formality, the private and the public. One could say that your projects spring from an audacious negotiation of such relations, questioning established understandings of them. I mean, ad hoc solutions and comprehensive design, industrial products and handmade artifacts, anonymity and authorship, and of course the old and the new, they seem to be equally present in your approach. What I'm trying to say is that you seem to manage a very delicate balance between such contradicting or seemingly opposing ideas. So the first question I would like to pose is about how you make such cultural and conceptual tensions productive. So more specifically, in many of your projects, you seem willing to not turn away from what is usually considered the negative aspects of what is at hand. Either this is an existing building to work with or a context that needs to be interpreted. Rather, you often seem to make space for the flaws, to give voice to the defects of a project, allowing them to exist or even celebrating them. What I'm particularly interested in is that sometimes this seems to be a strategic way of dealing with mistakes, with the inevitable setbacks of the building process, perhaps even a way of saving money or keeping the budget on track. And other times it seems to be a way to rediscover play and pleasure, to reintroduce color and ornament. So could this focus on the negative, this value of mistakes, be considered a key to understand how you manage to balance between antithetical forces, both in theory and practice? This could be my first question.
That's of course quite a question. Thank you, and I was happy to hear it. I mean, because what your question brings together is, yes, the seriousness about what architecture is about, not only creating space, but to respect economies, to make things realized. I mean, at the end, the fact that we have to realize things, whatever other thought, concept, reflection we could have, at the end, we have to realize things. And I think to us, yes, let's say about a mistake, I would say it's rather about the opportunity. In a certain way, I think the approach we have is that we want to see all the things which are around and which are sometimes organized in hierarchies of importance. You also could give them all together the same importance. So that means that the unimportant part all of a sudden can become the important part. I think you might know this. I don't know the title exactly of the work of Marcel Broodhaerts, in which he depicts all the countries at the same size, not the same scale, but at the same size. And this is, to me, I think, a way we like to approach things. So that what you call mistakes, I would say, aberrations, I would say things that are a little bit unclear, but that are playing in the periphery, that we love to really also keep those in mind and bring them also to the center of what is happening. And mostly you discover at that point, at that time, is that they save you from the purely conceptual focus, and they give you an opportunity to change things. I think also Christophe came to that point, like, what is this solving the problem, yes or not? We often say, let's not solve the problem, but let's change the problem. Let's not answer the question. Maybe also in Caritas, we even answer things that had not been questioned. So, I mean, this position towards what we see around us, though on fact you are in a building site on a serious track to get realized what you were intended to realize, still having this peripheral openness, saying like there are still opportunities to be found, that helps us to make what we are making today. To us, this is quite important. This, I would not call it freedom, because it's not only about freedom, it's maybe contrary to freedom. It's a little bit more about understanding what the periphery could bring. And this yet in the design, at the design moment, but of course also the moment we go into action, into the making of the architecture. And I think this is, in a certain way, also a little bit according how real life is, how we live. We not only can live the way we want to live, we often have to live the way that the things are happening around us. And then your life can be quite nice, quite exciting, if you are open and prepared to, I would not say the change, but to the 100 changes that are demanding around you every day. So in that sense, to us, architecture is something, at least for us, that comes pretty close to the idea of life.
Thank you. I don't know if Inge would like to add something to this.
Yeah, I don't know. I think you have been, in your question, you have given yourself already a lot of answers, I must say. So.
Okay, so maybe I move on to the next one. Hopefully won't be giving many more answers in this question. I guess I would also like to talk about a word that Jan had said that he does not like. It's the word reference. You have said this in one of your lectures, which I was looking online, you know. So you have said that you would rather speak of observations rather than references, concluding that, of course, we should be able to name our influences, but we should also be able to feel our distance from them. I really liked this idea. And if I understand correctly, you are suggesting that what matters is not only to recognize references, but to understand how these are set in motion in new ways, or how they resonate with the creative thought and imagination of the architect. As this is a discussion about tacit knowledge in architecture, could we say that in the construction of architectural knowledge, this might be of significant interest, namely developing our skills in transcribing or translating known things between different contexts?
Well, I think at this point today, architecture, at least to me, has a quite double relation with the idea of the reference. I think more than ever before today, the understanding of the history of architecture, or let's say also the recent history that brought brought architecture where it is today, becomes or is quite important. That what we do today, we refer to a context of history, a context of understanding, a context of theory, and I think this is one of the most exciting developments of the last decades. At the same time, it sometimes happens that architecture becomes let's say, a subject or an object of debate rather than it finds still its own capacity to, in an independent way, move on with things. I often say that when we look to the quality, and I mean not that the one quality is better than the other, but the quality or the type of quality of architectural competitions back in the 80s and the 90s, what came out of it, by the independent proposal, the debate was often energized, while today often we are in very energetic debates before we come to the act of thinking, designing, and making. We have to admit that there is at this moment a kind of difficult love around the table, let's say. But having said that, that's why we often, and also merely when we talk with students on how to deal with references, we said, well, just rather try to observe them than to analyze them. Because in the analyze, somehow you could say one is expecting the real truth about it, the real understanding about it. While in the observation, you much more easily and quickly can enter with your own subjective approach to it. And maybe you might even leave the reference earlier than when you really significantly study it. But by leaving it earlier, you might take maybe in a much more quicker way the understanding of it with you, and from out of that find that independent way to act later on. In the next stage, we talk with students or we debate a little bit like, is there a difference also between the word conception and the word imagination? Of course, there is a difference. But I mean, what does it mean, and how could you work with those two words, one next to the other, like observation versus analyze? And we discover often when we keep it on the idea of the observation and the imagination, students more quickly can move on in their project, because they got much more this loose fit attitude towards the understanding and towards the independent capacity of acting. And what you say, this idea of distance and proximity to the things. This again, periphery versus center versus focus.
And I think it's not only about the architectural reference or the artistic references that we all have and know. I think observation is also about like the daily life observation. And I think we have been showing it already, like in the lecture or in the presentation, the observation of the railing that was then redone by someone all of a sudden, but that gives also inspiration. I think that's also like the important thing for us, that reference is a very wide thing, or should be like
Yeah, the references.
More than just like the typical architectural reference we all know.
We ourselves, in that sense, we might collect those things, and I try to avoid a little bit the word reference in that sense, but we collect ourselves a lot of images, like a daily habit of the things that are around us, the things we meet at the street, the things we read in a book or whatever. And this collection of images, this collection of things, we doesn't call it reference because we don't need to refer to it directly, but often you meet those things later on and you can shift them into the things that have happened. I think throughout the lecture, the many points of Martha Clark, Francis Alice, it's not that they start as a reference at the first point of the project. No, you meet it and you meet it in between, and they help you sometimes to clear out what you're on at that very moment.
Thank you very much. There are a lot of things, that come to my mind with your answer, but I guess it's time to pass on to Hamish. And I think also the things you described about how this also resonates with your teaching at ETH will be along the lines of Hamish's interests as well. So thank you again. I'm looking forward to meeting you and working with you.
We will soon. Thank you.
Yes, thanks. Thanks, Jan, for that excellent lecture. I found it really interesting. And I think that's a really nice segue into some of the questions I'm interested in.
Yes.
I guess I'm interested in this process of drawing that kind of recurred throughout your lecture, and I guess recurs in your work and also in your teaching at ETH, I think. So I was wondering if you could sort of reflect on the relationship between this sort of drawing process and kind of the way that you think, whether the idea comes first and then you draw it, or whether the drawing comes first and then you kind of try to understand what you've done, or whether it's kind of more complex than that and both are happening at the same time.
It's happening, of course, at the same time. You use both in one or the other way. So you use your drawing to express your images or your imaginative ideas. And those ideas, you have to draw them also at a certain moment. So it's like, yeah, it's a tool.
It's to us now. I mean, I have to say, as comes clear that we are now in the field of a new practice since almost 2 years now, and as we reorganize the practice, but this in many different ways. One of the rooms, you could say, of the new practices, we call it a drawing room. And this drawing room, yet the title emphasized the idea that the drawing is not just something that happens on the occasion of wanting to clear out a project, but it becomes also kind of independent act. Huh? So if I would, but I will not do it since time is limited, shift screen, I collected some images on drawings that are regarding projects that have been delivered already, and we redraw them again. Just to, in a way, to not to be happy with ourselves, but to try to discover new things in between different drawings. So to us, the drawing becomes back, and that's the thing we are at this point very interested in. On the other hand, on one hand, as you've seen, the kind of projects that we present tonight, they have to do with a kind of interest of projects today, but interest in how to operate in a society today. On the other hand, the interest of drawing at the studio, at the practice right now here, becomes even more significantly important. And actually at this moment, we are reinventing new ways of redrawing things, or we do, like for example, for the Charleroi project at this moment, for an exhibition, we are working now on a huge drawing of like 19 meters long, a scale 1:50, in which we redraw really the relation between the Belfort, the townhouse, and the first Tyrrell, and we start to reflect again on how this space really could act into the city. You could say this is far too late because you're working already, you're on the building site right now. But then no, it's not far too late, because we are now talking about the real use of the space, and we want to make new connections between what happens ups and downwards. And then on the other hand, also the place for making useless drawings that might be eventually one sooner or later meaningful into things as they happen, projects and so on. The increase of this amount of drawings is significant. So that's what we like, I think, at this moment, that for example, you have on one hand this urge of things we are all confronted with in society. On the other hand, still the, let's say, not the craftsmanship, but the ultimate research instrument being the drawing, to reflect on that, but also then in a certain way enjoying the making of the drawing and the medium and the quality and the drawing as an image as such. Goes together also with the idea at the end, and that's maybe helped by making the drawing, that whatever happened, urge or whatever, you as an architect, you have the capacity in all these debates of what it should be architecture. You always have to say, yes, we are the ones who are able to give the, not the answers, but the terms of things form. And of course, there is a huge relation, to me at least, to us at least, in what is the form of the things and what is the drawing of the form and what is the drawing of the strategy and so on.
I think that's...
Yeah, but it's for sure also the pleasure of the drawing. And recently we have been drawing balusters, or how do you say that?
Railings.
Railings, hand railings.
Maniac.
One-to-one scale, just to test and to see like if the detail that we wanted to have was the correct one. But at the same time, it's also like the pleasure of doing or of making that drawing. It's not only because you need that drawing, but also then all of a sudden you discover that if you make like the real size of the drawing, it becomes a nice drawing also and you enjoy it. So I think that's also important, just to make drawings, because it's also nice to do.
And drawings are the ultimate instruments to find, like the San Codardo image, I would not say links, but kind of tensions between different projects, and to confront through overall projects to make you, to give you the opportunity to reflect on where you are and where you could go at a certain moment.
I think this is incredibly fascinating, the way you talk about drawings, that they come in at every moment in the project and that they have different purposes and they provide you with different insights. I think it's a really rich story that you tell. Christoph, do we have time for another question, or?
You have another one.
I do, but I can ask that. So.
I had one, but I would very much prefer you to ask the question. Yes.
Well, maybe this one has a quick answer. I'm not sure. I guess I was looking at both of your biographies and the way that you trained in Flanders, but you then have taught in architecture schools throughout Europe and currently teaching in Switzerland and in Belgium. So I guess I'm interested in how these different contexts and cultures affected your work. Did the training in Belgium in the early 90s have a particular impact on how you formulated your approach to architecture? And I guess, how does your teaching and research now kind of feed back into your work?
Well, this is a question which could take a while to answer it completely. If we start from like the 90s, I do think that at that time, at least when I was leaving school, teaching architecture was an unclear happening, let's say. It was, we had here at school, though, all the ones you know and you love, Julian Lampens, Jos van der Rissen, and so on, crazy guys. But at the end, I had to say, I cannot say that at that time, and I think it changed a little bit for you, Inge. You came a couple of years later, and at that time you had the introduction of Patrice Moutinich, where you've been working also. It was kind of small time frame of change. Paul Robrecht there, Marie-José Vanet later. This was but to me, when I was raised, this was not yet there, and so it's there. I would not say. I find that, to me, to say, like, as we discover nowadays architectural education as it has started. I remember me starting to teach 2005 myself, and then soon I had the opportunity to join the chair of Christophe Anthony Fretten and in Delft at that time. And this was, to me, at that moment, the rediscovering of what architectural teaching also could be. I mean, also in the sense like I discovered architectural teaching at that moment, though I was interested in it to do myself, not because I was frustrated about my 90s experience, because still I thought we can do something. And then I have to say, making jumps from that moment on until now, it's gigantic. It's extreme, different architecture education in the last decades, how it developed, how it opened the minds, not only just, but opened the debates and opened the ways we look at it. Sometimes even a little bit too much, I have to say, honestly. We should go back to more drawing table and a kind of intuitive way, but that's another debate. You should not ruin the one with the other. And I have to say, being now today in Zurich, in which we not only teach, but we also have this opportunity to do on research. And I think for an architect in practice, the word research maybe should be rather be repractice. And I mean, that's what we do also. We study with the students, work out of real practices, but then also the reflection happens rather by the drawing once again. And this makes to us that somehow the relation between practice and between teaching comes back closer, because you use, I would say, ways you work in your practical field, in your own practice, you use the same in your teaching with students. And in that sense, it's a very rich situation. And in that sense, for example, well, yes, I'm named professor at ETH, but for example, we make also book sets, which is called Carousel Confessions Confusions, which is a kind of books box in which we invite people to confess some things, but which is then has a format in which also Philippe Dujardin is partner, making images. But for example, Inge there also comes back to the front, and in a kind of independent reflection, Inge makes a drawing of the topic of that small magazine of 64 images, or the topic that the person, the invitee, is invited into. And that makes that, you see, there start to be turnovers between the practice and the studio and the research and so on. And you got involved in many other ways with each other, or different ways than ever before. And to me, so in that sense, teaching today is on one hand, happily much more academically related and supported, but on the other hand also has seemingly, and we discovered that at ETH gigantically, also very practice-based entrance. But I would not say this is only an ETH thing. I think we find that back. If I now go back to my school where I've been raised in Brussels, Ghent, St. Lucas, how I see there how this enters, or this way of thinking is really now also part of teaching, and many other schools we visited. Yeah, it's quite something. But the relation of academy and practice, I think at this moment, it has never been so strong than now than ever before. Sorry.
Yeah, I think, first of all, thank you very much for your questions. And we almost have to finish, but it's probably true that architectural education is much more strongly influenced by sort of ethos of, in the old time, in the old sense, problem solving than it was some years ago. I mean, it's also, that is of course, the dominant discourse in our times. Yeah, we've got the climate emergency, and we've got diversity and what have you. And somehow architecture is often portrayed as something that has to solve a problem. And what I do always find very important, and really not only refreshing, but truly, life-changing in your work, is that you, in fact, sort of turn this thing around, where this is clearly about the realities that we live in, situational scarcity, which you addressed at the time with bravura, for example, and we had long conversations about that. But it's not about the usual answers to this thing, to this problem. And the second thing which I also remember is how important it was to have a community. And of course, sometimes you join communities, sometimes you make your communities of work. You find your collaborators in a philosopher or a photographer or an artist or a craftsman or people from very different fields of work. And perhaps that is also something that, as it were, allows you to create a different kind of knowledge and come up with different imaginations than those which are just limited by problem solving. I'm afraid this is not a question, because I did have a question about pleasure, but then Inge was actually answering it already. Because my question was, because my question really was, is there something that some kind of knowledge that you can only, and perhaps this is a question to Inge, is there a kind of knowledge that is, for which pleasure is a precondition?
I'm happy this is a question for Inge.
I don't know what to answer, Christoph. Architecture should be pleasure.
It's not an exam, obviously.
Architecture is pleasure and should be pleasure and stay pleasure. Always.
At the end it is. I mean, look, the things as we presented them, they might sound, of course, like very, and it is, of course, very deeply reflected and very deeply worked out. It is at all. But fundamentally, it's also just a gigantic pleasure, even if it's sometimes really painful. But it's a pleasure, and I think also that's the whole thing. I think often architecture is felt as one of the most severe things to do in life, and being confronted with rather impossibilities than possibilities. And I don't know, I cannot explain anymore exactly where it happened once for us at first, but you know, the first project we showed in which we lost the job, but we won some total other understanding on it. That's quite a pleasure. But we lost the job as a young architect. Can you imagine that you don't have a job when you come from school, but you find something else? And I mean, this is to me something very important, I think, is that this moment of pleasure of things, you do not find it in the immediate first way of acting or reflecting. Mm-hmm. You will find it in a more deeper, but then if you want, you can see it and you can find it, that kind of pleasure. And then soon, yes, it comes in a kind of discourse of things. You discover much more how much more pleasure it can be. And
thank you very much. I think that's a very, very, very nice statement to finish this evening on. And I hope we have opportunities to continue this conversation in another place. But I think for this evening, it is a very good end to things. May I ask you, thank you very much, all of you, for your contributions. Jan and Inge for a lecture that is not just beautiful, but again, something that I guess we all will think about for quite some time. Hamish and Jonas for your very, very well formulated questions. And of course, the audience for their attention and presence, because I now see quite a lot of students also from Wuppertal who actually tuned in on this evening, and I'm very pleased with that. Next week, we're going to have a lecture by Mechtel Stuhlmacher from Kotknie Stuhlmacher, and the lecture will be hosted by Tom Avemate. I hope to see you all there in the way that we see each other these days, but fortunately, there is travel, again, is possible, even across the borders of Belgium and the Netherlands. So hope to see you all soon. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Bye.